Hola, ¿qué tal? Mi nombre es Claudio Hernández. Buenas tardes a todas y a todos.
Hello, everyone. My name is Claudio Hernandez. Welcome to this second discussion for today for the Digital Recovery Group from UNAM. So let me remind you that everything that is being discussed today will be also available in our microsite so that you can also revisit the previous discussions and pending activities. For example, we have the inscriptions right now open. So I am pleased today to introduce all of the colleagues here and the specialists that we will have today. So for the moderation of today's session, we have Alberto Castro, the digital strategy coordinator from UNAM. Now I will pass the floor to him. Thank you once again for joining today, everyone. Hi, Claudio. Thank you for the invitation, and hello, everyone who has connected to this call in Mexico and other locations. Good morning or good afternoon. We need to do this now in this era. This is part of what the pandemic has allowed us to do, to expand time zones and geographies digitally. So thank you so much for the University Museum for the organization of this meeting. I believe that the coordination of this events has been great. It's a little different to what we are used to, the extension, the way, the presentations. There are several elements here that are working in favor for this event to be a success. Now, today we have a panel, as we can see in the program, related to the conservation group for the Mexican library. We are not going to make a report out of this meeting. Quite the opposite. We are trying to discuss what have been our experiences in the last 5 years for what we have been experiencing so far. Some of you might think, well, 5 years is not such a long time, but it depends, right? It depends on the type of work that you have been doing during the pandemic. Even with the isolation that we have been working, we have been producing, and thanks to that, we now reach year 5 of work, which we're happy to do, because this is not only about the experiences that we can gather, but also the different products that can be created in everything related to digital conservation. Now, in terms of the panel that we will hear today, it is related to the efforts coming from the cross-functional specialists team that is expert in digital conservation, which is actually part of what we do here at UNAM. The Digital Conservation Group is an initiative that Mr. Pablo Moura has fostered, and in several moments he has shown interest in the importance of preserving digital heritage in Mexico. And in this specific case, talking about the different and various digital resources that are produced and that have been produced for several decades now by means of several digital technologies. This is how the GPV starts activities in 2017. And this year, we turned 5 of uninterrupted work. And the last 2 years, we have been in a pandemic situation, as we all know. That is to say, this group has not stopped working, and the results are quite remarkable. Now, when we talk about the Digital Conservation Group, we are talking about members that participate in different institutions, perhaps mostly from UNAM, but also from other national institutions, both from Mexico City and elsewhere. And this enriches what this group represents, because we not only talk about the work that we do in the Mexico National Library, but also these are pieces of work that are related to different problems and elements from the specific point of view of the members. So this is how we have been moving along and generating this working group, which is not only focused in gathering, but also in producing good results. We will be discussing these issues as we move on. So as I was saying, the working group for digital conservation actually also works as a big laboratory in which we can find solutions to various challenges that digital conservation brings. When we talk about challenges, we might think about technology, but no, it's not only technology. The challenges are also related to policies, transmission speeds, strategies of conservation, digitization, and several other issues that in one way or another create an ecosystem that is very well related to conservation. Digital conservation is not an isolated effort. And it is not something that we should just leave at the end, put it in a drawer, and lock it. No, that is not a conservation practice. And we will analyze all of that with our guests today that are here on behalf of several other members. Because once we talk about the structure of this group, you will realize that there are several committees that work around the conservation group, and we tackle several disciplines. Now, to talk about what the digital conservation is, basically what we need to understand is that the digital objects to be available for their use and conservation everywhere at a long term. So a basic definition would be this. So people might think, well, that's a very easy task, right? But it isn't. This definition implies a lot of resources, a lot of technological tools, and human resources as well. Why do we want to do this? We are aiming to avoid losing information. And this is really not an digital archaeological practice. This is more of a effort to avoid losing the information in the first place, and not in a decade, but actually 50, 60 years. And this is something that should have started to be done from the onset of the digital era. That's where conservation should have started. However, today we know that there is a lot of information that has been lost with time. Now, in terms of digital conservation, as you can see in this screen, this is data from this week. And you can see that the production of digital conservation in Spanish for open access or open source, it's quite low. We are producing around 6 articles. If we take the highest number per year in the last decades. So this is not an in-depth research in terms of figures, but I just want to emphasize what this region is producing. And based on these figures, it is clear that there's still a lot to do in terms of digital conservation. Now, in this specific sense, please allow me to introduce Isabel Galina. She holds a PhD in information science by the University College London, and she is also a researcher at UNAM. And she's also a founding member of the conservation group. So please, Isabel, could you talk about the beginning of this digital transformation group? Thank you very much, Alberto. Good afternoon, everyone. I am very happy to be here. And taking into account this 5-year anniversary, I'd like to do a recap of the work that we have been doing for the last 5 years. Fortunately, everything that we have done is in the minutes of the meetings that we have had that have been preserved in the last 5 years digitally. And there you can see
Recording in progress. Recording
how,
stopped.
how this group started working. So in order to promote new digital platforms like repositories, magazines, books, and websites, we have found the concern of the loss of such work. I believe that there is no one actually devoting themselves to detecting this type of problem. And 5 years ago, we noticed that there were some isolated efforts or individual efforts, and there were some international initiatives around this. There were some works done around international work in Mexico. However, we were interested in finding a space to talk about the specific needs of the organizations in our country. So we knew that there was a technological component to this, but also a social cultural component. How are we going to talk about that with those things in mind? So we wanted to offer a collaborative and research space to talk about digital conservation, but with practical um, implications that deals with real problems for those who are working here that are actually preserving digital material. So as of 2016, by means of the recently created Office of Digital Innovation, we started finding ways to how to approach this problem from an organized group. So we created a proposal for CONACYT for funding so that we could create a national laboratory of digital preservation. That was when we actually had the idea first, so that we can the preserve and communicate the bibliographic and video documentary materials in the country. At the time, this proposal did not move ahead for some formal situations, but some important consequences came out of that. The first one was that we learned how to contact with all of the people involved in this issue. And this created some sort of snowball effect in terms of how to start creating different networks. And with this group of people, we decided to create the digital conservation group to perhaps work with this in a lower scale, but not less important. So we understood that this was a very important topic to tackle, and the most important thing was to move ahead, baby steps, but ahead. Now, on March 13th, 2017, that's when the first meeting of the Digital Conservation Group gathered with 18 members, mainly from UNAM, but we saw also people from the ITES.
Vinieron personas de la Secretaría de Cultura, de la UAP, de la AGN, del INAI, de la Fundación ICA, de la Asociación Iberoamericana de Preservación Digital. Ahora hay gente del INA, de la UAMEX, de la Fonoteca Nacional, del Archivo General del Estado de Oaxaca, de la UASP, la UAC. Y creo que también es importante mencionar que tenemos estudiantes, gente que trabaja independiente y más de 15 dependencias de la UNAM, ¿no? Que ha sido parte de este grupo. Entonces, dada la experiencia que teníamos para organizar grupos de trabajo para abordar temas novedosos y complejos, discutimos ampliamente, me acuerdo, las formas de organizar y de trabajar. Para mí en particular, yo recuerdo una de las problemáticas era cómo hacemos que no se quede como en buenas intenciones todo lo que queríamos hacer, ¿no? Entonces hice como un recuento, esta es mi apreciación personal, creo que eso es importante.
So we did a recap of what were the premises. So a philosophy of organization. So the first point that we wanted to say is there is very little time. So one of the characteristics here was that we were interested in analyzing this issue from our personal activities, but that were not necessarily related to our job. And I believe this is a very important part of digital conservation, to have a person devoted to this type of situation. But in general, this is something that you have to do in your extra time or free time as part of this. So this overworked situation was something that we had to accommodate for. Now, the second point was that we wanted a dynamic group. We wanted to avoid a commission or some sort of committee that was excessively formal. And we wanted the group to start organically growing because this allows for much more solid commitments. And that's how we maintain this type of minimum bureaucratic processes. So, of course, with time, we have been formalizing our structure because we actually grew to that point. But this has been something that grew from the bottom up with the support of the National Library, which is important to emphasize as well. The next point is that we set goals and tasks. So even though we knew that what the country needed was to create some guides and guidelines and practices, we knew that those were very big tasks. So we decided to break this down into tasks that were actionable. Now, since we do not have a solution for the digital conservation problem, we started to find different tools or different documents that could be useful and that as a whole could actually help to tackle this problem around digital conservation. Now, as we have been consolidating ourselves, we have grown in our ambitions as well. And this is how the group has also evolved. Finally, let me just say that we have different aspects, levels of commitments and realities. So people are interested in digital conservation for many various reasons and to address very different problems. So we need to find a way in which everyone in the group can participate according to their needs and according to the available time. Everyone is welcome, and there are many ways of participating, from attending the meetings to being part of a working group. So I believe that this creates a flexibility so that we have different ways of participating depending on your possibilities. Do I still have some time to talk about the division of the working groups? Yes, I didn't see the clock, but okay, let me continue. At the time, we set forth four main tasks. The main one, to establish the group, to create it. The second was to actually make a proposal for the legal backing that came from the bibliographic heritage. Number three, to create a report of the situation in Mexico. And number four, to bring a status quo report. So each of the people involved in these four working groups will speak after me, and these groups actually organize themselves, they deliver their plans and reports, and then we hold general meetings in which the participation of each working group is actually heard and discussed. I believe that thanks to this spirit, we have been able to create a very kind and committed group to collaboration. And I believe that this flexibility has allowed us to have collaborators that are part of one or two meetings, and others have been part of a more sustained period, and some people have been here for the last 5 years. So I think that the most important thing that we can learn and contribute, regardless of how we can do it, that's the important point. There is no contribution that's too small. And in this case, I believe that this is a team to be proud of. I feel very proud of being part of these groups. And now I will open the floor for more specific issues. Thank you very much, Isabel. I believe that this is extremely interesting in terms of the beginnings, going back 5 years of what we thought of and how we thought of things. And 5 years later, we are finally seeing some results, how these initial projects have been maturing and evolving as well. Now, what you have been saying about the participation of the members, this is a real issue, right? This is a real thing. It is important to emphasize that because many people approach the group thinking that we provide secret recipes or chemical reactions that will solve their problems. And then they leave because they don't think they'll find their solution here. Uh, but the thing is that there is no secret solution to the problem. We need to work together towards a common purpose. And I believe that this is something that the group understood from the very beginning, to start educating human resources around digital conservation. Thank you, Isabel. Now we will hear the presentation by Yuri. Yuri is a software engineer and she is a PhD candidate for information studies in the digital conservation era. I will stop sharing so that you can do it, Yuri. Thank you, Alberto, and thank you very much to the museum, the MOAC, for this event. Okay, so thank you everyone for sharing this discussion with everyone of what we have experienced in the last 5 years, which Isabel has very well explained, the situation that made this group possible. And what I was saying at the beginning, what we tried to organize at the time was mainly geared towards two aspects. On the one side, the National Library needs in terms of this digital legal repository, so that the participation and the creation of some act or law could allow to include the perspectives of several specialists and from the perspective of a digital conservation. And this led to the creation of a group to talk about this legal digital repository. Now, this obviously transformed, and there are several things that currently work differently. Something that also happened at the time, as Isabel was saying, there was this curiosity and this need to understand and know what are we doing in digital conservation and what should we do now, so that in a more formal way we could analyze the issue and we can start to understand what digital conservation actually entails. And from the technological side, to talk about digital conservation, the fact that the digital word is in the title makes it so that we can think about the fact that the most important thing could be technology. So at the time, a group or subgroup was created that started to review information about technology that is needed for this type of processes. So that is exactly how this type of work started to move ahead. Collaboration as well was needed in order to develop these themes that kickstarted our group. It is also important to mention that, as Isabel was saying, since it was hard to organize ourselves, we tried to be as flexible as possible, but we also tried this to be more than an attempt. We wanted results because digital conservation is a reality, and we didn't want this to just be a good idea. So that is why for these 5 years, we have been trying to make evident the need for this. So on the one side, a group that is being pushed by the National Library because this is an important priority for them, but also because in the whole country, it is necessary for those who generate digital content to understand the importance of conservation, and so that materials can be created accordingly. So that is why this type of work has been evolving in the group. And what we currently have is just a whole different structure. So from what we had at the beginning, which was a group with three specific aspects that are interesting, of course, for the library, we realized that as people came into the group, we noticed that there were various needs. Some of them were common needs, but some of the needs could be directed to the study of certain things that go before conservation, actually, so that we can clear out in our minds, so that we can understand how to act around this. So this is what provided a new organization to this GPD. And we have currently this coordination area in which we have people that um, deal with the administrative side of things, from diplomas or to organization or to management, the Congress that we have. So this is thanks to a logistical team that the National Library has provided by the Digital Innovation Office. So we have four important areas here, as mentioned, but they have subdivided as well. On the technological side, we have the digitization and the mass storage, but also everything related to strategy, policies, processes, and to understand how digital conservation works, everything related to metadata, information, what is what we need in terms of digital conservation, and what I just mentioned, strategies and policies, and also conservation plans. Now, something that is very important as well that has brought us to this day is to create or to generate a relationship with other groups. We do not want the GPD to be just an inside office inside the university or the library. We need to liaise with other communities that work around digital conservation, even internationally, or work with institutions that we know will need to try to understand this issue, because this is part of their activities to protect, preserve information that is generated in digital means that will have to be conserved or preserved. So these working areas that we have defined as themes are in turn made out of all of the members of the GPD. All of these years, what we have been able to do is, on the one side, to create 2 international summits. We have continued with our sessions that Isabel mentioned, 3 sessions per year since 2017. We have 3 summits starting from 2018. And we understood that it was not only important to be on the inside, but also to generate a community that needs to understand what conservation is. That's why we did that. And also generating workshops every time that we celebrate the Digital Conservation Day. We organize events and workshops in order to celebrate productively what preservation is. So we have a website as well, which what we most try to do is to continue this participation with communities inside our country and institutions that are interested in this problem and this issue, and generating programs that show the lessons that we have learned so far and that we are eager to share with others. So this is basically what, in terms of the structure, I can tell you. Thank you very much, Yuri. Thank you for showing us the structure of how we are working as a team and the structure that we have evolving into. This is something that we have tried to do to go beyond obsolescence. Thank you so much. So now we will pass the floor to Brenda Cabral. She is an expert in information technologies, and she will talk about her theme, which is the state of the art of conservation in Mexico and Latin America. Thank you so much for this invitation. Thank you to the museum, MOAC, for preparing this wonderful discussion panel. So I am convinced that the work that we have been doing, as Yuri and Isabel have mentioned before me, that this group has done an extraordinary work around digital conservation. So let's talk about the research group that was the one that kick-started this group. And I will talk about the advancements, progress, and what we have done. We have all mentioned that what we need is to recover, maintain, and communicate the historical memory that is in digital documents. And if we forget this, at the end, this will be absolutely indifferent to everyone. This is a quote from Jose Saramago that I believe was quite interesting. Now, something that we started doing in our research group is to start to understand the conceptualization of what we understood as conservation itself. So the most used concept, or the one that we base ourselves most, is the one coming from the conservation glossary. So mainly this is where Alberto was referring to, of durable conservation. And here, what we want to emphasize is, for example, other specific aspects as the technological side of things and the physical or digital stabilization. So when we analyze all of these aspects, we understand that this is part of the conceptualization first. And another thing that we are learning here is what type of format should we focus ourselves on. So we noticed that there were several very important contents that are also part of the National Library, and many of them were related to databases, recordings, and other types of materials that the people that started to join the group found interesting. For example, photography and other materials that were very important, which are also digital conservation material. Now, we took several of the ideas here, and we noticed that there were several drafts projects so that we didn't start from scratch, and we understood some projects were ongoing. For example, this digital network, DPN, which started in the US, which has more than 52 organizations as part of this network. There were some people participating in different places and also from other areas. We understood what are the standards that were important for decision making. That's where several workshops and courses started to arise. So what's premise, what's OIs, and other conservation models, for example. And this was very important for us to communicate to the group in general. Now, another very important point that we believe is something that from last year was communicated to the EV communications department is the digital conservation landscape, in which we noticed how digital conservation is being perceived so far, what are the problems so far in terms of what this type of digital transformation entails, and other type of policies. So for example, the lack of a national policy for digital conservation, and among other things. So we can have here, we can see a list of the organizations that have participated: UNESCO, ISO, OCLC, etc. And now, in terms of this Latin American landscape, we can see that several digital conservation initiatives have arisen, and we see that internationally there are several of them. However, many of them are facing very particular problems, either by the region or their countries, and some collaborative alliances that actually exist at a regional level. And mainly, these alliances tackle some specific problem. However, more generalized issues have not been addressed. For example, the development of norms, guidelines, or standards at an international level that could be implemented to any kind of material. Something else that was detected by researching the literature is that these type of initiatives usually come from the specific guidelines coming from the United Nations or the National Australian Library by this letter that they wrote, where the digital conservation is emphasized. And there have been some international initiatives from international organizations that have been applied to other particular cases. Now, let's talk about a research that was carried out here in Mexico, where we decided to understand the current situation. And we included several institutions that have big collections. In this case, we have the Phototech, the Filmotech from UNAM, the National Sound Library, the National General Archive, the UNAM Archive, and others. And other people that we send this questionnaire. Some of the names are listed here of the people that participated in this survey. This is just a sample of the people that participated, because in general, this was a 20 people survey. 15 institutions or people responded, and that allows us to understand what was the situation at a national level. So this is one of the questions that were asked, 14 questions specifically, and there was a final opinion or open-ended question. So due to the lack of time, I will just talk about 3 brief examples of the questions that were asked. For example, some of these questions were the following: how much did they know about digital conservation? Definitions, characteristics, or documents that could be related to digital conservation. And here we could see that most of them understood that these were methods to guarantee information in any format that could maintain their contents in the long term. So this is how we could see that they had at least an approach to what digital conservation was about. Another question that allowed us to understand what type of documents they know in terms of digital conservation, we see that if we add up all of these percentages, we see that not even 40% of some of these documents are known. most of them didn't know most of the documents, and most of them were aware of the Heritage Preservation Charter from UNESCO. So that was the one that most people that answered the survey knew. Another question that was asked was, what are the physical infrastructure, that is to say, space, servers, computers, to devoted to digital conservation? Most people, we noticed that Fonoteca, the audio archive, had a vault or had a specific space for servers. They had support admins, and that's it. Most of them were more um, answered more about having a scanner or a photocopy machine, but nothing more than that. They didn't have a greater infrastructure in terms of how to preserve their documents. Another question that allows us to understand what the situation was in terms of digital conservation for them or for our country was what activities or what institution was in charge of this type of digital transformation. Is one of them said that they didn't know. Some other people knew if there was an office or a direction office. However, in this specific question, what activities are done in this office? Many of them, they just mentioned the name of the office that would do in terms of conservation, but no further details. So this was an indication that they didn't know what this was about. So this is a literature review, and we, by means of this literature review, identified the most recurrent and the least recurrent subjects. Among the most recurrent, we found some projects or initiatives, some challenges that they found in terms of digital transformation, and the least recurrent were the ones about institutional collaborations. Very few of them knew about this in terms of security processes and issues related to practical matters or strategic matters. Now, these are some of the challenges that were identified by means of this research project, and one of them was the obsolescence of available technologies. Also, the damage of some of these components, either hardware or software, the interference of property rights, the variety of formats of the digital assets and standards, and also to guarantee the permanence of the object. So some of these issues were prevalent, as well as the different levels of preservation, because many of them said that by means of scanning or changing the format, that was preservation. But there are different levels, right? And this is my last slide, by the way. So also the high demand of qualified professionals and the clarity in terms of how to take care of these materials. So these were some of the advancements and progress that we were able to do in terms of the knowledge around this picture, all the way from concept to initiatives that are being done and how the situation is being done. I had charts and more information where I specified the different issues around this problem, but I guess that would be for another time. Or maybe for our second meeting, for a second summit. Yes, so this basically was just a general overview of what we have been doing in this group. We also had progress in terms of metadata. This is all being written in a book, which we believe will be soon to be published. Thank you so much, Brenda, for this presentation. I believe that this is something that allows us to understand all of the work that has to be done so far. There are so many initiatives and efforts to be carried out. For example, the typology of digital assets. I believe it's important because sometimes we believe it's just something that has to be mentioned, but there are so many digital assets that need to be preserved. So we need to understand, for example, even from the website, right? And official means for doing that. Thank you so much. So now we have the participation of Manzanera, Norma Aída Manzanera. She is also an expert in information technology in UNAM. She is a bibliographer from the Colegio de México, and she has a course of Intro to Museology. Thank you so much, Norma. Welcome. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Muak, for coordinating this space so that we can share with all of you what we are doing in the Digital Conservation Group. I've been part of this group from the very beginning. And last year, during the pandemic, we decided to participate and to work as coordinator of the Strategic Conservation Group. So in these previous presentations, we have understood that how difficult it has been to tackle this very current issue of digital conservation, where we are working every day in a very fast-paced world, which is technology. And I was suggested to talk about this not in terms of technology necessarily. Not everything is technology. We have several specialists here and experts, and how we need to create cross-discipline working groups. And I'd love to share with you the opinion of two specialists, Dr. Bob Chast, that says that digital conservation projects are 90% executive and operative, and 10% technological. Trevor Owens, in turn, says, digital conservation doesn't have a technical nature. Access to digital information in the long term requires flexible scopes that allow us to address consistently conceptual matters. Conservation cannot occur only by machines. Conservation requires the work of professionals who can address digital conservation problems directly. So our working group precisely is focused in this specific planning effort in order to define the policies, in order to gather a number of efforts that are ongoing, that are kind of separated. There is no harmonization or standardization of laws, but we don't not only need laws, we need commitments, we need budgets that sometimes are not even enough. So we do need policy, but not only a declaration. We need to know what's behind the policies. What are the who are the people that are responsible? We need accountability. Do we have the knowledge, commitment levels to actually do this? Is there a commitment with the institution as well? Even though there is no national digital conservation policy, can we, from our own organizations, do something about this? So, as I was saying, we have this group from a year now, and we have been meeting once a month. And the first thing that we did was to deal with this conceptual semantic jungle and try to understand. And we have thought of calling on everyone so that we can actually define your terms and make them public so that everyone knows where are we, what is the starting point. and so that we are not repeating some efforts. Now, we have done some workshops for the organization, another one for the Mendeley, for the internal organization of our work. And there's another one for the guide for digital transformation policies in the declaration point of view. Now, something that I wanted to say is that many of our participants came with the hope of finding a secret sauce, but that doesn't exist. We need to actually do it. So there are good news, actually. We have a commitment now to carry out the exercise of defining our policies in our own organization, to list that and share it as a contribution, concrete contribution. I hope that we will be able to do this year. It's time to harvest what we've done. So on Feb 3rd, we will start doing this from 3 to 4 p.m. This is an honorary group. So as the song says, just give your free time. So this is in the benefit of everyone. I believe that we can understand by all of this effort that we will be able to come on the other side with a very specific policy for the collections that we are preserving, or for the organization itself in the best of cases, and not wait for a national definition. Or as much as we can cooperate with this definition, that would be important. So my invitation is for you to join the group, and that would be it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Norma, for this comment. I believe that this is a very, very important contribution for everyone to hear. I believe that sometimes we think that this is just technology, and not necessarily. We see this in the National Library as well. We notice that we have technology, but beyond technology, we need structure. We need to provide structure for all of these projects. How to do this, how to start, how to sequence it so that we can finally reach conservation. Thank you so much. Okay, great. Now we will hear from Ricardo Alvarado. He is a graphic designer by the School of Plastic Arts in UNAM. He has a master's degree of design in the Metropolitan University, and currently collaborates in the Aesthetics Research Institution. Ricardo, welcome. Hi, thank you so much for the invitation. I love this working group, let me tell you. And I love the digitization working group that I will talk about now. Thank you very much, MUAC as well, MUAC, for organizing this event. Okay, so let's talk about two perspectives. Number one, what we have done in this group is what I want to talk about, but I will link that to some myths around digital conservation. So is preserving digitizing, or vice versa? Where digitization is only one part of what heritage and technology and information is. That has as a final stop the users at different times and different places. First myth: to think that digitizing is the end or the purpose. Sometimes in our projects, we think that we just have to digitize, as digitizing is the objective, as if that action was actually our purpose. But it's not. We need to digitize with a greater purpose in order to offer users protection to their files, also to continue the heritage, to have some impact on society. Those are the major or greater purposes of digitizing. Now, in the digitization group, as I was saying, we are working in different subjects. For example, so there are some people that are working around how to manage analog files prior to digitization. Okay, so another myth is that, okay, I digitize and I can throw away my analog material. No, we need to also preserve the analog. Why? Well, because in these files issues, this is our original source. We should not get rid of our original source. We don't know that you might have a better technology in 10, 20 years. And for some research processes, we actually need to go to the original. So we should not throw away the original after digitizing. Another myth, we should digitize absolutely everything. As if just by saying it, it was as easy as that. And that is not the case. Number one, it is it is a very lengthy work to digitize. And in the case of these files to belong to an institution, we need to digitize only what the institution is interested in, only what the institution is interested in preserving. And how are we going to do this? By policies. And these policies need to be based in the historical value of the material, social value of the material, if they are important for society. Something else that tends to happen is that if I buy a scanner, I can digitize and that's it, as if buying a scanner is enough. But that's not the case. This is a big, big myth. All of the different devices have different characteristics and qualities. So can you say that all of them can digitize at 300 DPIs, but not with the same quality? And in the case of DPIs, the smaller ones, most of them do not have more DPIs or 300. Even though it says 300, it's not. And some other things. Not all of the analog materials have the same quality. So if we have, for example, a photo that has greater quality than perhaps newspapers, but even in newspapers, there are several qualities. So we need to take into account what device should we use depending on our purposes. So something that I've heard kind of jokingly, but you know that sometimes that reflects the truth, that digitizing is just to push a button. That is another big myth. Digitizing is to have a digitization project, a digitization mechanism, to be careful with the analog material, to calibrate our materials, to use our scanners and monitors and cameras, to adjust the different parameters depending on the material, including metadata, to include the validation. So this 300 DPI issue, the famous 300 DPIs that we need to print, that we need to digitize, and that is also a myth. We print in ink injection printers, but in order to print in offset, we have less, the equivalent of less quality. And to digitize, as I was saying, we have a photography, paper photography, that could be good in 300, 600 DPIs. But if we digitize a small slide, we will have a very small file. But not only that, we will not get all the information and the quality that we need. Okay, so depending on the material, that's where the parameters of digitization will be. Something very common is for people to say, no, leave it like that. It's very, very similar to it. Or this is a blue thing. Why is that? Well, basically because we should not think or rely on the red only. That is why in many cases we digitize with color cards, because these color cards have the specific colors printed so that everywhere we buy, the same color mark that we buy elsewhere is the same. So we can trust these colored cards, but not necessarily here. So if we say that we're going to digitize our calibrated monitor and our scanners are calibrated, and we send this image to someone that you say, okay, I see this that is blue, that's because the monitor might not be calibrated, right? Another issue is the fact that files might last a long time if they are saved in a disk. Or something that has been mentioned before is this issue of policy. So I am digitizing, I have my objectives, my projects, and if I do my process, and then there's an administration change. So if there is no policy that allows the new administration to continue with the resources that are needed in order to preserve our digital files, it would be probable for that, for the new administration, if they do not consider the policies, and it is possible for our work to be affected. Why is everything that I have just said important? Well, because the idea is for us to have some representations of our analog material. They need to be quality. If maybe we had one of the best photographers in the world, they had great quality. When you digitize that, you need to reflect that quality. Also, our files need to be backed up in standard files, JPEGs or PNGs or whatever it is. And they need to be interoperable so that we can send it to someone else and they can use it as well. And with all of these characteristics, we can preserve this type of files and recover them. Okay, thank you so much for that. So let me just end it here. Yeah, thank you very much, Ricardo, for explaining these myths. This really allows us to go into depth with digitization. We know that digitization is nothing new. We have been working projects like that for 20 years, and some of them have been successful. Many of them have been a lot of failures. So these groups allowed us to understand a little bit more how to produce more digitization when libraries were closed. So there was a growth in digitization, and we are still pushing this type of myths forward sometimes. So it's important to work on them. Please go ahead, Ricardo. Okay, so this minute that I had that I cut short, let me use it. So we have had failures. So maybe the word failure is a little harsh, but there have been some experiences that we need to go back and repeat them. That's an important recognition and acknowledgement. Many of us in these groups have had these experiences. So we can go back and analyze what we have done wrong and repeat it correctly. Great. So now we will talk about storage. Policy, history, digitization. And we need to store this information somewhere, right? And when we say store, it seems to be the fact that we are just putting it into a file, into a drawer, and that's magically storing things and preserved because there's a label. So I believe that we need to really discuss about storage, and we have Mr. Sáenz, Rubén Sáenz, who will talk about the storage issue. He has several and great amounts of digital material. And I am sure he's not just throwing everything into a label drawer. So please, Rubén, can you talk about what has been done in this issue? Thank you, Alberto. Thank you, GPV. Thank you, MUAC, for this. And yes, I represent the new mass storage working group. And let me just emphasize that there is a technological side to this. And if I may say so, it's one of the most important parts. And we have a system that allows for the storage to be done correctly because it's the means where we are actually doing this specific task. What we aim to do is to have this fully and at a long term. So this requires a periodic and updating of this. And as you were saying, Alberto, this is not just dumping everything into a drawer. We need to implement some mechanisms to troubleshoot and recovery plans as well. So this group, of course, is much more oriented to technological sides, to the technological side of things. So we do deal with the device all the way from selecting the device, but the issue is as we were thinking right now. So let's say that we go to a server, we go to the cloud, we go to a hard drive. All of them have pros and cons that multiply as the file and the archive grows. And that's where things get interesting. So to think about storing in terms of conservation has its complication. It's not only saving files into a hard drive, because devices sometimes, of course, get obsolete. You know, your CDs, your laptops are obsolete now. So you might have a CD for 5 years and it's no longer working. Computers no longer have a CD reader, right? So that is part of the technological obsolescence that we need to account for. And much of the work that we do is related to that. So this group, basically what we're doing is taking two main tasks. On the one side, preservation in terms of bits. So we store things in certain devices. And what do we do in terms of actually having them in good condition? How do we recover them? And that would be the logical side of things. How do we ensure that in 10, 5, or 20 years, the semantic content is still there? So many of you might have known Flash. Flash was one of the most popular means to store. We use that in UNAM but now it's no longer working. We never did the technological format. So this is something that is completely lost. Web browsers do not play Flash now. So that was a problem. And now when we add the word mass, and this is part two, what we do is that we are talking about huge files, huge archives, national and institutional. So we're talking about four big institutions that are dealing with this. We have the National Mexican Library, we have the Fonoteca, the Museography School, and the National University, represented by the General Direction of Information Technologies, the General Direction of Staff, and General Direction of Communication. So this group gathered experts in technology in different infrastructures. And we are not only talking about terabytes of data, but terabytes. So that is what the word mass entails for us. The amount of data, the amount of information is just huge. So that size of data makes it complicated to manage as well. As Alberto was saying, it's not only a fact of storing things in a drawer, but to understand how big is your drawer and to store in the most efficient way possible in order to recover things if they get lost. So right now, for example, we have more than 3 million documents in the National Library. So to recover any of them, that is a complication that we need to consider. And also considering the origin as well, there should be a plan for storing, not only just file save and that's it. So what are the technologies that we use? How does that go into the model that we are trying to use? And how can we apply them? What would be our standards and what are the best practices? Well, we have been analyzing the issue of resilient technologies. What are the mechanisms or the means that are long lasting and that perhaps even allow to have a less painful conversion? We have the different types of means that are being used that are changed very often. For example, tape was one of these technologies that was very often used. And that becomes a complication and also something that does not only applies to technology, but also to preservation. So that what I'm talking about is the emergency recovery. So what happens if there is an earthquake, a flood, things like that. So we need to think that it shouldn't be here physically. So you shouldn't only have a copy somewhere physical, you need to have another copy, but not next door. You need to assess where to have an actual copy in the regional section. So if there's a earthquake, you have to find a place where the earthquakes or other type of problems are not prevalent. So there is a report that has been made around this. And in the future, we need to test. Some people work with the cloud, some others have different data and where to store it. So the idea is to end up having a lab where we can continue testing how to do this in different media or means. So this is something that can help us distribute information in different technologies. So this would be a little bit of what this group is doing. Thank you very much for your participation, Rubén. And we agree with everything here because we need to maintain a lab of conservation, and the facilities that we currently have in Mexico City and Querétaro that we have now, a great deal of preservation is being done there. We need to have a conservation lab. And conservation is an important piece for me because, as you were saying, there are some systems that are disappearing. So these systems that are disappearing, like databases and some other technologies that you were mentioning, that they went out in a flash, as you were saying. And this is something that is now a reality. We have done recently an archaeology process for recovery, and it's not simple, and it entails a lot of investment. So what's cheaper, to preserve or to rescue in the future? You know, at the end of the day, we're talking about investment. So we need to think what to do there first. Okay, so now we have again the participation of Yuri. So please, Yuri, can you talk about your group? And if you could also address a book that was recently published, which is one of the most important resources that we have generated, and that I believe, and I've seen actually, how to use this in systems. So besides this guide, this is a good moment to talk about conservation. Thank you very much, Alberto, for this. So we started as a technological group as part of this effort. But the idea here is that when we talk about digital preservation, we focus sometimes in the fact that what is going to solve this is just technology. And of course, we need technology, no doubt, as Rubén was saying. However, just when we started making this review, and that I was part of this organization, we realized that there are many things to take into account in order to determine what tool would be ideal for digital preservation. So we started with a benchmarking in order to understand what could we recommend the National Library in terms of buying a specific tool, perhaps. And when we do that, we realized that we needed more things. And there is a big number of tools available. The community actually has several websites where we can find many different tools. And sometimes you might even get confused. So when we dived into this, when we dove into it, we wanted to understand what we are looking for. So we created this guide, which has a series of criteria that allow us to ask ourselves, what do we want to do? And what should we look for in a specific tool? And then we need to identify if what we want is a digital conservation tool, actually. Because what we noticed in the community is that we were focusing on finding tools that were tools for repository and not tools what we needed to actually manage this type of digital conservation. So we need to assess what type of tools we need to get into them in the market that allow us to control the whole preservation process. And that is why this document was created. First off, to understand what do we need to ask ourselves, when do we need to explore, in each of these tools. And of course, to try to understand what all of the tasks that a digital transformation system needs to do. So this was our first task. Originally, we were the technology group because we were looking for tools, but in the search for this tool, we noticed that, okay, we know what this tool is about. So how can we use this tool? And that is when not everything is technology actually applies. You need to know what is the purpose, from which perspective are you going to use this tool. So with this process, there are many tools, for example, from Roda, Lipsay, which is a commercial tool. And we realized what was the scope of the tool. And by this study, we realized whether they were useful or not. And this guide, it was very important for us because it not only allowed us to do inside the library, but also to share it with the community so that everyone could also benefit and understand what does a digital conservation system means. Now, as I was saying, it's not only about looking for the tool. We started to work in what we call digital transformation plans, which is an interesting concept because in the digital transformation area, sometimes we are confused by that. So we started looking into it and we noticed that there is a digital transformation plan needed to actually set up a digital transformation system. So starting from that, we need to identify if this tool is actually a system, and then you need to know how to set it up. That comes from the plan. And that is how we changed our focus. So coming from the technology group, finding tools, to how to develop a plan. Okay, so we have been working on this issue for 2 years so far, and we have identified several elements that we can use and generate so that the whole community can understand and see what we have already understood, which is how to make a plan. And this is what that is why we have now renamed our group Digital Conservation Planning. Because what we want to generate is a guide that allows any institution to do any kind of conservation plan. So depending on what your objective is, we can help with the specific plan so that it might be easier to set the tool up, but not only that, to also build inside the organization the structure in order to see what is the digital transformation system setup, because this comes from restructuring your areas to assign staff to certain tools. Sometimes we think that this is something that we didn't have to do, but when we realize what preserving actually entails digitally, we realize that this is actually part of our tasks. But we need to learn more about how to do it and to get involved in other activities that if we analyze this in depth, we realize these are activities that are natural because we are now talking about digital materials and the nature of this is different. but also for those who make cataloging or who receive materials or those who archive and things like that. We need to deal with all of these materials because at the end we have several elements and materials that will not be lost. They will be translated into the digital world, but they will have a transformation in terms of how things are done. That's where the difference lies. And sometimes we think that this is not something we need to do. But we will realize that it's actually our task to do. And that we also need to learn how to take care of these new assets or these new objects so that they can be preserved through time. So that's what we are working on in this group. We hope that we can soon share the good news with you that it is ready. And in this group, actually, what we have done is not only people from the National University has participated, but also people from other institutions inside the university. For example, the General Direction for Staff, the Office of Technology, the Library General Direction. Oh, 1 minute. And we had the participation of several other institutions that are not part of UNAM, like the University of Puebla, for example, the General File. I forgot the name right now. But with all of this participation, we have tried to find some common elements across the institutions to apply it individually and to generate something that's useful for the community. Thank you so much, Yuri. We are now closing our session. We don't have time, a lot of time for Q&A, but I just love to add that we will have a number of events due to our 5-year anniversary. As I was saying, we have not only been meeting with a specific regularity, but also we believe that it might be viable and necessary to share this knowledge with everyone. So in that specific sense, the idea is to generate courses, a digital conservation course that Yuri, Lisandro provided. But we also need to do other workshops or digitization of documents with the guidelines that have been mentioned so far. Our colleagues have said already we have a lot of work to do here. There's plenty to cover right now. So I think that we are doing a good job. This has been the work of 5 years. There's been progress, and we should share that progress as well with whoever wants to hear. So this is great. Thank you so much to the museum for coordinating this event. Thank you, Alberto, for this. Thank you, colleagues, for your participation. I think that it was very, very important to share what this was about, what were the different lines of work, especially if we wanted to talk about heritage. It is very important to understand what this is about. So thank you, everyone. Thank you on behalf of MAC, on behalf of Tech de Monterrey, all of the different institutions that supported. We still have one forum, which is on the 9th of February. Let me remind everyone that you can also go to our microsite where all of these panels are being recorded. You can also click on the partner institutions if you are interested in contacting any of our allies and partners. Thank you to the scientific committee that has been working as well alongside us to discuss which issues were important to support. So that was another part of it. So on behalf again of the museum, thank you so much for your participation. Thank you to the museum for coordinating this event. Thank you everyone for your support and have a great day. Thank you everyone. Have a good one.